I found the perfect post notes where to make my list of the worst of the year. Just covering it for spoilers. Let me know if that's not the perfect. Right? Let's go. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, The Inked Reader. Today we are doing one of those funny videos that I personally love to watch, and I'm gonna premise that I'm gonna be very negative about all the books you're gonna see in a second. I did not put them in order. I think some are disappointments, not necessarily quality-wise horrible, they just didn't work for me, and I'm gonna explain when we come across those. Others, I generally think that not only they did not work for me, but I also thought that quality-wise they weren't it. I'm gonna try moving forward in my monthly reviews, when I don't like a book, to also bring an objective view of why people might actually enjoy it, because I think it's fair enough as a reviewer. It's something I should do better. But I'm gonna keep these videos at the end of the year as the place where I can unleash all my hate without having to also say, well, this might work for you because of this and that. So here is just complaints, just so you know. If you are not a fan of these videos, click out of this video. If these are your favorite reads of the year, good for you. Again, there's not gonna be much positivity in these. I will try my best for in the monthly wrap-ups to share both sides. Here it's just the negative side, because these books didn't work for me. Without further ado, without any order, let's just get into them. The majority of those I've got rid of, and so I tried with my post-note to make a list going on Goodreads. I must say, let's start with one of the first I've read this year that was a big disappointment. This is Faebound. So Faebound arrived with Fairy Loot. I believe it's a duology, don't quote me on this. It's a fantasy story, and you follow two sisters. They live in this world where elves, I believe, have been kind of like gone extinct, and then for a series of events they end up falling in the land of elves and finding out, well, guess what, they're not so extinct, and actually they need to adapt and live among them. I'm gonna be very vague with synopsis, don't quote me on any of the synopsis. But why this did not work for me? I had a lot of issue with the characterization. I had a lot of issues with the pacing, with the execution of these, and the prose. I think the idea was quite original, but it was butchered throughout this book. And it's actually quite of a miracle that I completed this story. We have scenes where characters get stabbed, they're put to bed rest, but because they're bored they just get up a few hours after and they run for miles. I'm not saying that they just got to the bathroom or got themselves a cup of water. They actually run for miles, and I'm just like, then just don't put them to bed rest, just don't, just come up with a better solution for them to pass the time rather than running for miles. We have instant love, where they go from exchanging two words to each other, hi, my name is, to you're the love of my life. You have a fantasy world where humans have gone extinct for eons, and there are sentences like, oh, I love you so much, I've reached nirvana, which is like, whoa, so humans have gone extinct but somehow Buddhism has remained, sticked around. Like, you could have not come up with any other sentence. There was an enemy to love potential that was butchered, because we knew from the start that they would get together, but then when they do, it happens very, like, it doesn't fit in well with the story, and then they fight, and then it's just stupid fights, and then it's just messy. And there was literally no saving grace apart from the fact that the idea could have potential. There are also animals that they kind of bond with, and these animals, there was like something around animals being touched and feeling sexual to the humans who's bonded to them, and I'm just like, no, we're going to bestiality, we're going to like a realm that I'm not ready to go into. It was a mess. It's like when you try to do mayonnaise and the ingredients just go their own merry way, they refuse to blend. That's how I would describe this book. Moving on, needless to say, I sold my copy and I will not continue the series. Okay, so I'm scrolling through my Goodreads, so I'm just gonna probably go like in chronological order because it's like of the order that I've read them. The next one I have actually DNF'd. I've read probably 3/4, so I still included, to be fair, because I've read probably 200 pages or something. And I'm talking about A Fragile Enchantment. This is a YA romantic fantasy, and my review on Goodreads, it literally says Bridgerton, but takes place in a nursery. Don't even remember what this is about. I generally know that there are royals, and you thought, oh yeah, so she is, she makes dresses and she gets hired from, you know, the royals to make dresses for them, and she starts having kind of like a hate to, I don't even know if it's a hate, to something with the prince. And my biggest grief with this book is the fact that this should have been an historical fiction. This should have never been categorized as a fantasy, because the fantasy elements were literally thrown in just to be then able to marketize these as a fantasy. Because probably is a more like YA-wise is a genre that goes more, but they were so scant, the fantasy element, that it is ridiculous. Let's consider a fantasy. And when I DNF'd it, basically nothing had happened, and I was more than halfway through. Like description of meadow might take like 4 pages, and it's just ridiculous. Nothing is happening. I think another thing that really rubbed me the wrong way is that there is a royal family in these, but the way the royals are referred to and mentioned is very informal, to the point that it becomes a bit ridiculous. Like the king is called Jack, like how you doing, Jack? That's the bloody king of the whole kingdom. You don't talk about Jack, oh Jack did that, oh yeah, I was speaking with Jack the other day. Initially I thought she was speaking about her cousin. It took me a few pages when someone else was referring to him as the king to realize that this girl, who had never met the royals before, by the way, had just started working with them and was referring to them just first name basis. I was like, what? Their love interest or something like that is called Kit, like, which is a nickname. She starts to use the nickname pretty much from the start, and I'm just like, so all of those silly elements are like small things if you want, but really rubbed me the wrong way, because it looked like a farce. It looked like she wanted to write Bridgerton YA, but she wanted to market it as a fantasy. Therefore, she threw in some shitty magic here and there. So yeah, DNF'd this, as I said, Bridgerton, but if it takes place in a nursery. And to be fair though, I might be a bit unfair toward Bridgerton because I've never watched it, because it's not my thing. So I just watched 3 episodes and we're like, yeah, I'm out of here. It's not my thing. So don't get offended if you like Bridgerton. It might be a very good show, but this is still a shitty book. The next one I actually finished was another Fairloot. I think it was an adult fantasy standalone by Fairloot, in the City of Stardust. And you basically follow this girl whose family has been cursed, and she has kind of have to get rid of this curse. I described in my Goodreads review the experience of reading this book as eating celery, which consumes more calories than it gives you. And I think it's exactly what I thought a year after reading this book. So I think the biggest fault of this was that it was extremely bland for me. It reminded me of Stranger the Dreamer, which is not a book that I particularly loved, but somehow I kind of really see the qualities on an objective perspective of Stranger the Dreamers. And it's though a book that I didn't particularly like, because when it's all atmosphere, less plot, for me it's very rarely a good combo. So this was Stranger the Dreamer's style, but way more boring with less content in it. The prose masked the fact that there was little going on in this book, but yeah, honestly, bored as well. And I think the protagonist, she, for a series of reasons, she's very naive, but she is naive to a point that even when things happen, she does not learn. Like, you know, if you put your hands on the fire, eventually you get burned, so you stop doing it. No, she's the kind of girl that would keep putting her hands on the fire. The first fire she can see, she just keeps putting the hand on it. So she kept making the same mistakes and falling for the same things over and over again, to the point that I'm like, okay, you're not naive, you're actually objectively stupid at this point. When I was reviewing this on Goodreads and I was speaking about the love interest, Alexander, I said his only quality is that sometimes he's not on the page. So this is sad to say that the characters didn't really work for me. The only thing I can appreciate about this is the prose, but it's not enough to keep together a whole book. And yeah, got rid of this one as well, I believe, as soon as I finished it. I was able to get the chair, and so I moved a bit up I'm actually having a good time going through Goodreads and reviewing the books and rereading my reviews. So the next one, Kingdom of Fear. This could take the cake, probably be in the very top like worst books of the year. And I hated this book. I disliked the second book, but this book just really consolidated the fact that Maniscalco is not for me. This is a trilogy, this is the conclusion of that trilogy, and it's about this witch that has to team up with a demon in order to find the murder of her twin sister. And in this book, it takes place in hell, and it was just absolutely ridiculous. I think her characterization and plots for me do not work with the first book. I enjoyed it enough, and then it went downhill, as I said here, teeth thirst, dead on arrival, at the bottom of the hill. It just managed to bore me to death and also make my eyes roll constantly. I think she should have not done demons in this series. She should have done elves or fairies, because you can't do hell and make it look like a teenage party with drama. There was no depth, there was no real deprivation or sin, which is what I would expect if you are in hell. You have wrath, which is the love interest, which is like this handsome with a heart of gold but tough exterior. And I used to love Alice Wrath, and by the end of these I was like, listen, if you like Emilia, if you're so in love with Emilia, which is such a bland, boring character, I can't like you anymore, because I can't like someone who's in love with someone like that. I know it's very judgmental of me, but I just couldn't justify his taste anymore. And sorry for any spoilers. If you don't want any spoilers, probably move on to the next one. But they refer to each other as husband and wife constantly, like, wife, husband, come here, wife, why did you do that? Which was just so silly. No one calls someone wife, come here, constantly. It's not like one off or like as a joke or like it might happen now and then. It was constant throughout the book, and I'm just like, you can't call someone, first of all, how many times do you need to call them? They're in the same room with you. But it's just ridiculous. There are a lot of, so she's not put any sex scenes in the first two books, and I think in this one she decides to just sit down and just say, you know, all the sex scenes I didn't share with you in the first two books, I'm gonna cram all here in this book. I'm just gonna have sex scene after sex scene. The earth is about to, everyone is about to die, your family is about to die, everyone is about to have their fate forever changed for the worst. Let's stop and have some hot sex before we go and do that. Hot sex, which by the way wasn't interesting for me at all. I didn't find the smart good at all. I found it actually ridiculous. They get to the wedding part, but everyone is waiting for them, and then they have to just wait until she gets licked like a lollipop head to toe with all the guests there waiting for them. They do vows to each other four times, and the fourth time is so long. I got bored. I could imagine, you know, those kind of ceremonies where you just fall asleep. Emilia's supposed to be this powerful something. I don't want to spoil too much. So she's supposed to do this something, and it's ridiculous, because if you match what she should be with her actual character and how just juvenile she is, just silly, just petty on certain things, just very annoying. It's like ridiculous. She can't be that. I mean, maybe in the world that she created, in this ridiculous hell that she created, she could be, but it's so ridiculous, and I just couldn't do it. And I finished my review on Goodreads, as I'm gonna finish this now, a review of this book. The scene when Emilia is eating cannoli, but she describes it as if the cannoli was a penis. Shall we talk about that one? Better not, perhaps. The next one is a disappointment. I don't think it's a horrible book. I think this has worked for many people. I personally thought that it had a lot of potential, it had a good start, but ultimately didn't live up to the hype that it created in the first half of the book, and that is A Fate Inked in Blood. Overall, I gave it a 3 stars. You know how you say that, you know, some things are better than the sum of their parts. This is the opposite. That, you know, in certain scenes this was quite good, but in summary, altogether, I don't think it was particularly good. I think Freya, she's insufferable as a point of view, and I think it's her point of view mostly that you get in this book. So having to follow her for 400 pages, at one point I was just not into it anymore. I just couldn't do it anymore. I was just like, I was done with her. And I also think this reads as a YA, despite the content and certain scenes being like, it's an adult book, it's tailored to adults, but it reads very YA. And so overall I was disappointed, because some parts were like, okay, we're getting there, we're getting somewhere, we're like, no, okay, we're back to be bland and not interesting. Will I read the sequel? I think I got rid of my copy, so if we'll ever just, I'll be in a room with nothing to do apart from this book in my hands, maybe I will read it. The next one, I don't think it's necessarily a bad book. I think that for horror fans will have a lot of appeal, I would say. For me, I was expecting to love this and I didn't. This is the Law of the Skies. I think this is a short story. It's about this bunch of 6 years old that go on a camping trip, and one of them is a psychopath. And you know from the start that everyone is gonna die on that trip. And I think for me, these just lacked pages for me to really feel it. It just started to be a slasher from the start without much context for me to care for these characters. So the only thing that really got to me was that we're talking about kids getting killed or dying horribly. So that was the only part I really felt. But because I didn't spend any time beforehand with these kids before they were basically put in the ground, it still did not reach the emotional impact they could have. The title, I thought it was based on a story that's told during these, you know, at the beginning of the story. But then I didn't see the point. I thought, oh, that's such like an amazing title. The story was interesting, but I didn't see how it connected. I did listen to this on audio, so I might have missed that part. I think he had a good ending horror-wise, but I don't know, the execution, something. I was expecting to absolutely give this a 5 stars, to be one of the most disturbing, horrific things I've ever read. In the end, I was like, okay, yeah, I've listened to this, moving on. The next one, that's another one that it was potentially in the top. A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire. Now, I have been a big fan of Armentrout when it comes to romantic fantasy. I do not read too many of them, but when I do, Armentrout would be one of the authors that I would potentially pick up a book from. So I did read, what is it called? I've got it somewhere. Oh, it's up there, but I don't have my glasses on, so it's no point in me trying. So the Blood and Ash thing, I think it's called. So the first one was right. I enjoyed it. I thought it was an interesting premise, and you got basically this sort of nun. It's a fantasy world. You got sort of vampires. They're not called vampires, and then you got this sort of nun. It's not nun, but it's sort of a nun, and this celibate, like, protected, always goes around veiled nun all of a sudden gets a new guard, and her and the guard starts having a thing, and at the same time there are vampires that are encroaching. People live behind walls because vampires are everywhere, so it's a very dangerous place, and she starts to rebel against her nunness. Well, again, for synopsis, please look these titles up. So this is the sequel. Now, in my Goodreads review I said, open the book, rip off the first 400 pages of the book, and if you can read the next, the last 150 pages, and are you okay with those pages, then you might want to go on. If you read those 150 pages and you're still not okay, just close the book, never look back. I was honestly shocked on how much I disliked this. I never disliked an Armentrout book as much as I disliked the first 400 pages of these, where literally nothing happens. In this book, they need to go from point A to point B. In the first 400 pages, they do not move their asses. All you get in 400 pages are the inner dialogue of Poppy, which, to be fair, is quite infantile dialogue. She's very naive, and I can justify that to a certain extent, because, to be fair, she's been sheltered and basically lived as a nun most of her life. And so she fair enough, she does not know a lot of things about the world, but her inner dialogue after 400 pages gets very boring, frankly. And the amount of time she describes orcs' eyes, I get that. I get that they are gold. I get that sometimes you want to remind us, write it down, I don't know, every 200 pages. I'm happy for you to tell me a couple of times during the book, but you can't tell me every 10 pages that you love his golden eyes. Like, it's too fucking much. I get it. He's got pretty eyes. It's a bit of a pity because I think that the sex scenes, compared to, for example, Kingdom of Wicked, the sex scenes are good. I think she's good at doing the steamy scenes, but you have to make the rest of the story interesting, because otherwise, just write erotica, don't write a fantasy book. So yeah, I will read the third one just because I own it. I have it in my hands. I heard it goes worse and worse. So will I ever finish the third book? I do not know. If I don't, I'll just get rid of the whole thing. I do think that Armentrout is a bit too accustomed to read YA, and she's struggling to find her footing in the adult genre. I hope she does, because she generally had good romantic fantasy stories in the YA genre. So either keep writing YA or keep improving, I hope, writing adults, because I know that she has the potential. It's just we are not there yet. The next one is the only non-fiction I have, which is called It Didn't Start With You. I don't know if I still have it. So basically, I was interested in epigenetics, and I wanted to reach out to a book that would explain to me exactly what it was, the recent research in the field of epigenetics, especially as someone who's interested in studying trauma and the effects of trauma on the body and the mind. Epigenetics is a fascinating topic for me, and I decided to look at this book. I think what this lacks is an actual, it's not about epigenetics, it's about his own personal experience of treating people that brought to the table when they met with him, or this happened to my family, this is why I do certain things, or I do these weird things, I don't know where it's coming from. And he might go, oh, what happened to your grandma or your, distant relative, and they find out, and so he kind of connects the dots. But that's not the empirical science I was looking for. That's not science. It's your experience and your theories, which I'm not saying that they're necessarily incorrect, but you need way more than, oh, this is just my experience to convince me of something. And the few studies of epigenetics that are mentioned are too few. They're not very well explained. So yeah, it was just a disappointment because it didn't deliver the empirical evidence, or even like a breadth and a depth of experiences apart from his own to justify what he was bringing to the table, which I'm not saying that he's not correct. I'm just saying you need to convince me with more proofs and with a wider experience from other professions as well, if it makes sense. So yeah, I was just a bit of, cool, okay, I've read it, but where is actually the epigenetics? Well, okay, the next one is probably, it would take the cake as the worst. I didn't have this, but I read 200 pages, so I feel like I can still kind of comment on this. This is Run Riot, and I got into this because it was like a reverse harem story that was advertised, and it was kind of said, if you like the Broken Bond series, which I did, with all its problem, but I did love a series, like, try Run Riot. Goodness above. Why? Like, this was, honestly, generally, I think I lost neurons connections by just reading 200 pages of these. This is about Grace, who is, so they're not called these, but this is what they are. You've got angels, you've got demons. It's an urban fantasy if you want. They live in this world among humans, and they are eternal enemies. Now, Grace, she has not found their bonds, so they can have more than one bond. She has not found their bonds, and she's completely naive, sexually naive, like she'd never had a boyfriend, never had sexual intercourse or anything of the sort. Imagine Grace, who's a 30 or 28 something years old woman, so she's not very young. One night, she is rescuing a friend. She sees a demon. She knows he's a demon, by the way. She sees him, and she says, "You look yummy, get in my car," and they live together from bed. Like, there is no, like, if you don't like instant love, meet your antichrist. Like, I don't mind instant love. I'm not a big fan, but I don't mind it necessarily if it's done well. Not like this. You can't have enemy races just he gets in the car with her. Within 24 hours, not even that, within 2 hours, they're living together. Within 48 hours, even maybe 24 hours, they are dry humping each other, and he's explaining to her what the clitoris is, because she does not know. Not only she's completely naive sexually, but apparently she never had a biology class. It's just, this guy she's so good, and she finds him trying to do cocaine. Basically, he sleeps on her couch the same night they meet. The next morning, she catches him doing cocaine on her dressing table or something, and she just, oh, please don't do that. And then even the same night, she dry humps him. He explains to her the biology of the body, and I'm just like, no, listen. Like, I know that she will have to find other 4 mates or 3 mates, and I just couldn't get past number 1. At that point, I was just genuinely laughing for how bad this was. So I just wrote down with my Goodreads. Grace is supposed to have 4 bonded. The first one, Riot, the only one I got to read about, is a homeless drug trafficker repenting, a drug user active, who has nothing to his personality apart from his tattoos and a vague resemblance to Demon Salvatore, but absolutely lacks anything of Demon's character, complexity, or viciousness for that matter. The coolest thing about Riot is his name, and it's not even his real one. So yeah, I generally sold my copy so fast. It's just enough. Like, just no. There is okay, this is a book that I would generally struggle to sit down and objectively share what I think people could like about it, and not being a bitch. Like, I think this is a book that would have challenged me the most. It would challenge me the most if I was to have such a read in the next year, where I'm vouching to be objective even when I don't like something. I don't think it has redeeming qualities. Okay, the next one is Evocations by Gibson. This such a disappointment. It was a fairy loot. I arrived it with fairy loot. I liked Dowry of Blood, so I tried this, and this is about this guy. His family put a curse on him, and he needs to reach out to his ex-boyfriend, who's now married to a woman, in order to get rid of his curse. And you start a sort of very odd love triangle that to me felt very cheating, not very much consensual, in the sense that, spoiler alert, but they would do stuff and then the wife will be, oh yeah, maybe I'm okay with it, which is not how I see polygamy, as you say. Like, I think it was butchered. But the most important thing with this book is, if you asked me to describe this book in a few words, I would describe this as a traffic accident. Tragic and unexpected, as I wrote on my Goodreads. I think nothing demon magic that's promised is delivered. We are talking about guys that belong to an occult, how you pronounce it, secret society, and you get nothing of a society. Like, the demon, sorry, again, I'm gonna spoil a bit, but basically the way they get rid of this demon who's possessing the main protagonist is just saying to the demon, fuck off. Literally, like, you got an exorcism that it's so lackluster that I was like, why putting it in the book? Why not writing a contemporary of a guy who's still pining after his ex, and the ex is confused about, does he want to stay with his wife, does he still love his ex? Just do a bloody contemporary. If you don't have good fantasy elements, you don't have to write a fantasy. I get that the marketing works best for fantasy, probably because you wrote a fantasy book in the past, but just branch out to new genre. Don't promise me something that you are not ready to deliver. The only time we get to actually see the society is when someone is doing a blowjob to the other one, and they're the desk in the society. That's basically the whole time we are described in this inner society, with occult society. We have the wife figure, who's this woman who can do no wrong, like even her farts smell like violets, and she gets cheated on, and then she finds out, she's like, oh yeah, I'm cool with it, do whatever you want. And I'm just like, the demon is not there. Like, the demon is boring. The demon just get exorcised with that, go away demon, and he does. So yeah, generally so upset. This is another one that would go in the very top 3 or 4 of the worst reads I've ever had. Frankenstein by Dean Koontz. I think he has a good prose, he has a few good quotes, but these, you got basically a killer on the loose, butchering women and cutting parts of her body, and then you got the Frankenstein, the actual doctor involved, the monsters. It's a bit of a sci-fi retelling of Frankenstein in a modern world, and I think it was just not well crafted. I think it was one of Koont's not good ones. I'm learning that there are very good ones and very shitty ones, and although again I do love his prose, and I think he had a very good horror element in The Enemy. The Enemy is so vicious. There was a scene that really stuck with me. I must say that I was very disappointed in this, because last year I believe Koontz was a #1 for me, and so in comparison this was quite bad. Yeah, his prose and that good horrific scene could not save the fact that I think this was a bit of a mess. Another very bland one, I'm just not gonna basically say anything about this apart from say that it was a thriller that didn't really work for me, was The Bird Eater. I think this is about a guy going back to a haunted house, and it's a bit of like history repeats itself, but I didn't find the answers or going through this process of the haunted house and the scary parts satisfying in the end. So again, this wouldn't be at the top. Up top would probably be a a honorable mention, to be fair. It wasn't horrible. I gave it probably 3 stars, but I kept seeing these on my script recommended over and over again. I love haunted houses stories, so I was like, well, why does this fail to just be something? And I can't really pinpoint exactly why, but I know that the delivery, the lack of answers, if you want, or the history repeats itself part of things didn't work out for me, maybe because the prose didn't catch my attention and kept it, because I listened to this on audio and I kept getting distracted. And the last one, I'm filming this 10 days before the end of the month. I hope I won't have to add anything in, but woof guys, the last one is Ruthless Vows. You know that Divine Rivals was in my favorites of last year, and then I read these. I finished this mid-December, and I got rid of both copies because I generally thought that she didn't have a plot for the second book. I'm gonna go into more details, I guess, in my December wrap-up, to be fair, but I wanna just say that I was so profoundly disappointed by these. It's still romantic, the prose is still flowery and still nice overall, but I think that she did not have the material for a second book. So she tries to really put together, and it feels like a sort of, in the first one you got these 2 kids that work as a journalist, and they are kind of enemies, and there is this war that it's at war because humans have to divide themselves between 2 factions belonging to 2 different gods. So 2 gods are at war. If you fight for this god or for the other one, you decide, and then the armies will fight. And it's a bit, to be fair, in hindsight, the premise, it felt like World War II fiction, but with a fantasy element in it. If I look back at it, it wasn't well done, even in the first book. The fantasy element was the weakest, but it was so strong, the rivals to something else, the prose and their like small moments together that made up their story was so brilliant. I really loved the first book. In the second one, that becomes old. That's not new anymore. So she, first of all, uses a tropes at the end of the first book to then start this book off, and I hate that trope. Is one of my most hated tropes ever. So then she kind of gives us the same thing where they have to start again in a sense, and it just doesn't feel new anymore. It feels old, and you have more of a fantasy plot side of things, more of the action side of things, and I don't think she does that well. I actually think she does that quite poorly. And so the plot comes together, this conflict and these fights, but they do not have meat to the bone. I did not feel the stakes. I felt like, oh, here we go again. I've read, this is like a version of the first book, but worse, because it's not interesting anymore. And rather than having a solid and fantasy action plot, the plot feels put together the last minute, just randomly. I'm gonna try to put more of my thoughts in a coherent manner in my reviews at the end of the second book was such a letdown compared to the first one. No, this wouldn't be at the top of my worst reads. As I said, I already mentioned the ones that would be probably the 3 tops, but these really let me down, and to the point that I won't reread even the first one. I would love a movie adaptation. I think that we could work well. I would watch that, but I'm not going to reread these because I just think it's lacking on a fantasy side of things. And I can be on board with a very romantic story. I'm not particularly I'm not someone who reads romance. So the first one was fresh. I could get on board with it. The second time, give me something new, give me something interesting, make the plot make sense, and events follow each other in a coherent manner. And I think she did not have a fantasy plot to begin with in order to action that in the second book. So yeah, guys, that's it. Let me know what are your least liked books of the year. This was done in good fun. If you love these books, good for you. I'll see you in my next video. If you are new, I would love for you to subscribe. As I said, I will try to be more objective in the months when I do my reviews, but I do love sometimes to just let it go and just be my negative self. I think we just need it. It's just my personal opinion. I'll catch up with you in my next video. Take care. Ciao.